Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Miller Time with Ike and Sharon Miller. Thanks for joining in and tuning in for this conversation. If you've been paying attention, if you've been a part of our conversations the last few weeks, you know we've been talking about issues related to dating and relationships and all of those kind of things. And so we've talked over the last few weeks about how do you know if this is the person you should be dating or if it's a person you should be dating at all. We talked about the friend zone. Last week we talked about why The Bachelor is not reality. So you can go back and check all of those out if you've missed any of those. We would love to continue the conversation on any of those as well. This week we were going to wrap up this dating conversation and wanted to talk about something that the less fun part of dating, to wrap up this conversation the way that most relationships ends, which is with breakups. So we're going to dig into breakups today and talk about those. And so if you have questions, feel free to hold those to the end and then jump in and offer those questions. That's our favorite part of this, is to be able to interact with you and to get your questions and your feedback and your comments. And so that's what it's all about. So let's jump in. We figured we would start by sharing some of our own worst breakups. And so,
no,
yeah,
you were definitely going first.
I'm going first? All right. So I guess my worst breakup was when I was in college, I guess, and was dating someone, and we had dated for quite a while. I mean, it had been a serious relationship, a year or so. And out of the blue, they just stopped talking to me. We weren't at the same school, and so there wasn't any, way of running into them. And so for several months, there was no returning calls. And so finally, I just gave up. And so for several months, there was no conversation. And then out of the nowhere, she called and was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And yeah, I was kind of like, "Yeah, good to talk to you," after several months of not talking, since our relationship never really ended. And so there was just sort of this, out of nowhere, she was gone, and that was the end of the relationship. So that was mine. They were just gone.
Oh man, so he told me he wanted us to share a breakup story, and I feel like kind of torn because it's hard for me to think of sharing a breakup story that wouldn't maybe make someone feel like I was throwing them under the bus. And so
well, my input on that is, I don't have to ask permission for somebody that ripped my heart out,
So
I mean,
all I'll say is I had some bad breakups. They were doozies. I was someone that I never handled breakups well. I got my heart broken a number of times, and I was someone who I would get so stressed out about breakups that I would lose my appetite, and I wouldn't be able to eat, and I'd lose weight, and I just never, I wish I could say I handled it with a lot of strength, like Beyonce, but I was not Beyonce. I was like a puddle on the ground. So
yeah. Well, what do you think makes them so bad? Why is a breakup so hard?
So I think there's two things. The first is just the flat out rejection. When you are interested in someone who's not interested in you, and it's just a huge disappointment. And if it was someone you were dating seriously, there's that death of the dream. But for me,
were you the dream for some guys? Just
no.
And it was the death of the dream.
Just everything you imagined your life being with that person is just snatched away. But for me, actually, I don't know if I would have put it this way at the time. In hindsight, it actually really hurt my pride. It was really, it really wounded my pride. And I think we underestimate how fragile our pride is, and how when someone rejects you and what that does to your pride is actually really crushing. Mm-hmm. So there's that part of it too that I think is really painful.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me was whenever someone broke up with me, is just a reminder I wasn't the stud I thought I was, and so that was always a bummer. So for me, my story, that bad relationship, that bad breakup, was kind of, I think the term is ghosting. They just were gone.
Yes.
They were just out of the picture.
That's something we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Because, so we're kind of old, and this wasn't a thing.
Speak for yourself.
This wasn't a thing when we were dating. But yeah, so you young whippersnappers probably know.
That really sounded old.
Y'all know that there's this thing called ghosting where you just disappear. Like you just stop texting, you don't respond anymore, and you just kind of disappear. And so that was one thing we thought, gosh, we really need to talk about that because I guess like a bigger theme we wanted to focus on tonight is honoring people, because it's so important to honor someone that you're dating, but it's also important to honor them and how you break up. And just to say, like, without qualification, that ghosting someone is not honoring them, that is not honoring to them,
cool.
It's not honoring to God, because it's really like the coward's way out, to be blunt about it, because who wants to break up with someone? You don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but to just not have the guts to tell them in person because you don't want to deal with the fallout is not what courage in dating looks like. And we really want to challenge people to have courage in dating, godly courage in dating. So ghosting, burnt.
So we've got ghosting. Figure we talk about lots of types of breakups. There's all kinds of breakups. And so to describe them, we've got a list of types of breakups by Taylor Swift song titles.
And I just want Ike to take all the credit for putting this list together because I didn't...
So these titles don't necessarily reflect the song, but they're great titles for what these particular types of breakup are. So you've got the blank space, ghosting, right? It's just gone. There's nothing there. It's empty. You've got the bad blood. That's the relationship that ends on terrible terms. There's still, that guy or girl still wants to kill you. They're still out to get you. You've changed phone numbers because of them. You've, changed your name on Facebook. I mean, the bad blood breakup. You've got the shake it off, all right, which means basically I'm too good for you. You're just going to shake them off. You've got the you belong with me. So it's the kind of you try to break it off, but they just won't let it go. They just kind of keep hanging on. It's like you belong with me. Don't you understand? There's the we're never getting back together, which really means we'll be back together next week. There's the I knew you were trouble, which is basically I knew you were going to cheat on me from the beginning, but I still decided to date you, even though I'd heard from everybody else that you cheated on them. And then there's the everything has changed. That's the it's not you, it's me, okay? I've become a different person over time, okay? And so I'm just a different person now. It's not you, it's me. Okay, so that's just a few of the different types of breakups.
Are those all the names of Taylor Swift?
Those are all Taylor Swift songs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
I did not know that. You know more about Taylor Swift than I do.
I mean, you said you were the old one, so. Just
keeping me relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So those are some of the breakups, some of the types of breakups. And so talking about how does this intersect with faith, right? How do we bring faith into the conversation a little bit? And one of the ways that we wanted to do that was to mention one of the verses from Scripture, 1 Timothy 5:2, where Paul is talking to Timothy, this young man, and he's talking to him about how does he honor people in his life? How does he honor different relationships that he has, whether they are older men, younger men, brothers, older women, younger women. And what he says to honor younger women as sisters. Basically what he's saying is to treat them with the same honor that you would treat your sister, a sibling, someone that is closest of kin to you, someone that is your own blood, to honor them, to respect them with all of that. And so we thought that was a helpful sort of context for thinking through honoring someone, especially when it comes to something like a breakup. And so in the midst of that, like, why are we so bad at breakups? Like, why do we have such trouble honoring people in breakups?
Yeah. Well, I think it usually comes from a really good place where you don't want to hurt the person.
Yeah.
But I think that because of that, it's a form of love for that person, but maybe it's like a lesser form of love because, a higher form of love would actually do what is the best thing for them and honor them. And so, examples of this is maybe when you're in a relationship that needs to end, but you just can't bring yourself to end it, and so you drag the relationship out.
Which is really a thing of fear. I'm afraid of hurting them, so it's motivated by fear.
Yeah,
really.
and so you drag it out and drag it out and drag it out, and then that actually makes it worse. Like when you're kind of like wasting that person's life where they could be finding someone who is a better fit for them. And so I think that's kind of usually what ends up happening is, you're afraid of hurting them or You don't want to be the bad guy, and sometimes that does come from like a good place, but it ends up causing us to make really bad decisions that end up hurting them more. And so I think we think it's loving, but really we're being selfish.
So it's kind of, if you know it's over, then cut it off. Don't just, because you're afraid of hurting them, continue to let it linger, because really you're only hurting them longer and hurting them more, and getting in the way of them finding someone that is the right person for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, a part of the conversation around breakup and honoring somebody and having the courage to be honest with someone is how you treat them after the breakup, right? And so a part of that is, when it comes to breaking up with somebody, sometimes what happens is we break up with them and then they still hang around because they still want to be in the relationship, and it's convenient for you to hang out with them until somebody else comes along. And so you end up falling back into things that were a part of the relationship, but really you're not committed to them. You're not really, and so you're sending a lot of mixed signals, right? And so there's not honor in that sense. And one of the things that's interesting, especially when you get into physical things, is in the same text, Paul talks about honoring your sisters, honoring younger women as sisters, honoring your fellow women as sisters, and with purity. And so there's kind of that connotation too of not just honoring them, but also, honor them physically. If you've broken up with them, don't go back to those old things just because it's convenient, just because it's easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if have we talked about being on the hook?
No, we haven't.
There's this episode of How I Met Your Mother that talks about this concept of being on the hook, when you're on someone's hook. And it basically means like you're just kind of waiting around for them to date you, whereas they are just taking advantage of that. Like they're kind of using you as like a girlfriend or boyfriend placeholder until someone better comes along. And I think sometimes that can happen in friend relationships when one person has feelings the other doesn't. But I think that can also happen with exes, where they kind of fall into this gray zone where one of them sort of lets the other hang around, but they're not really interested in dating them anymore. And I think that's just another way that we blur those lines and dishonor people.
Yeah. So what in your mind, what does it look like to honor someone in a breakup?
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird question, right?
Yeah.
But how do you honor someone in a breakup?
Well, I think there's a couple things. Like I said, having courage. We talked, I think on the first video, we talked about having courage in dating. And I think that's really important, not to let your fear or your selfishness to trump loving and honoring them. So that's definitely, I would say that's one thing. I'm trying to think, what would you add?
Yeah, well, I think a part of it is being able to recognize when it's really important for you to just step away from them altogether. I think usually the desire is to be friends, right? You want to break up with them in a way that you can still be friends. But the reality is, a lot of relationships, when they end, they need space. There needs to be a clean break. It needs to be some distance there. And so as much as we want to still be friends, or if we were the one that was broken up with, we still want to hold out hope that something's going to happen. If you're the person that broke up with them, it's really important that you give them space, that you don't send mixed signals. If you're the person that was broken up with, it's also important that you create that space so that you're not bought into this game of, well, maybe does what he said mean he wants to get back together, or does she, hope that this may work out in the long run, and so they're kind of hanging around seeing. But I think it's really important in honoring the other person to create that space and to have that space.
Yeah, and if you're the one who gets broken up with, I also would say to honor yourself. And I think that's a time when a lot of lies come rushing in, and it's easy to, this is like, we talked about The Bachelor last week, and this is like classic when they're in the car riding home and they're like, I just feel like no one's ever gonna love me. Like, when is someone gonna just love me for who I am? Like, I'm never the one.
Every time.
Yeah, there's like a script basically, and that's like the breakup monologue that I think everyone walks through when they get dumped. Is, am I lovable? Like, will I ever find that person? And there's so many lies that rush in that you need people around you who can speak truth. And I think if you're the one breaking up, make sure you're not speaking those lies to them. That you're not heaping lies on them, that you're speaking like gentle, loving truth to them. But yeah, honor yourself. And then another component I thought of when we were sort of preparing for this is the role of the community that is around these people. And whenever a breakup happens, it can be sort of awkward because there's usually a friend group sort of around the couple, and people sort of have to choose sides.
Right.
And as a result, it can become really hard for the friends to know, okay, well, how do I care for this person? And I remember I went through a number of breakups where I had some friends who I think they weren't quite sure how to care for me. Like maybe they had never gone through a breakup before, or they felt kind of torn between me and caring for my ex. And so what ended up happening was I didn't always have people there that I needed to be there for me, or people would just say things that were really insensitive. I think a breakup, and this is what I want to say, especially if there's anyone watching who's just gone through a breakup, is that breakups are incredibly painful. I think there's a reason why there's so many
there's
songs
kind of a grieving
written.
there's a
There's like a
that's
very
taking place.
real grief. And so if you are going through that and you're just really hurting, don't feel pathetic at all. It's a really hard thing that you have to work through. And so just knowing if you are the friend of someone who's going through that, to acknowledge that they are experiencing a very real grief, and that this isn't, they're not going to just bounce back from it. They're not just going to be fine, and saying things like, well, there's other fish in the sea, or, someone better is going to come along. Usually when someone just breaks up, they don't care about the other fish in the sea. They don't care about other people coming along. But to listen and to be present and to just be there, because lots of times you can actually contribute to that person's sense of loneliness and that sense of rejection, depending on how you handle it. So just to be sensitive to that as well.
Yeah. I think if you've been broken up with, too, a big part of it is having honor and respect for yourself. What does it look like for me to respect myself in this situation? To act in a way that 5 years down the road, I'll look back and feel like, hey, I treated myself with a lot of respect in a time where I didn't feel great about myself because of what was said to me, or because of the pain that I was experiencing, or what I thought about myself. I think another part of honoring someone in a breakup too is to speak honestly, and that's not to be ugly or to be cruel, but at the same time, there's so many relationships that end and we walk away not knowing why, or not fully understanding why they broke up with us. And so I think it's really important for us to be, if we're going to break up with someone, to be able to communicate at least a little bit of why we feel like the relationship wasn't what needed to happen long term. Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes it really is a matter of feeling. But I think at the end of the day, there's reasons that we started dating them, and we could give those, just like there's reasons that we decided not to continue dating them. And so it's really important in honoring the other person to give them some things to either understand why the relationship is broken, or to understand, hey, the next relationship I go into, these are some things that I can do differently. Because otherwise we kind of go into another relationship repeating some of the things that we have.
That's what I was going to say too, is I think a really healthy way to respond to any breakup, whether you broke up with a person or were broken up with, is to do some self-examination and maybe sit down with your friends and family and ask them, what did you see that I didn't see? Was there anything going into this that I was kind of blind to, that I just wasn't able to see? And ask those questions, because I think we all know those people that just can't stay single. They can't stay single long enough to search themselves, and so what they end up doing is they make the same mistake again and again and again. And it's really like, if you love that person, like you're their friend or family, it's absolutely like you want to like tear your hair out. And so that's another thing. If you're single right now and you're thinking about who do I want to be in terms of my relationship, this is a great time to sort of make those promises to yourself. Maybe tell family and friends ahead of time, like, I want to be teachable. I want to be able to hear what you have to say, so that I can, learn from my mistakes or avoid mistakes ahead of time.
So one more verse comes from Romans that we wanted to put out there just as a helpful one, is Romans 12:10. Outdo one another in showing honor. And using that as a filter when it comes to breaking up with someone, are we genuinely pursuing to outdo others in honor? Are we genuinely pursuing honor for and towards this other person in our breakup? Or is it more, how can we get out without being as honest as we should be, without showing the courage that we should? So, do you have any last thoughts before we kind of wrap this up on just breakups?
I think like the last thing I always feel kind of the need to say on this topic is, especially to women out there, that if you are in a relationship with someone who is abusing you, whether it's physically or emotionally, to get out of that relationship without hesitation, to not wait for that person to change, to talk to your pastor. If your pastor won't listen to you, find someone, keep asking people until you find someone who will listen to you and who will help you out of that situation, because that is not what God wants for you. That is not loving them or being patient with them. That's enabling them. And so I just want to say that, and that goes, honestly, that's true for marriage too. If you're in a physically or emotionally abusive situation, that is not what God wants for you. That God wants healing for your spouse, but that does not require you being there in the same house in danger with that person. So that's, sorry to end kind of like but that's like my heart, is just for women who are in that situation. And I think sometimes we can wait too long and just put ourselves in a really dicey situation. And so I just wanted to sort of speak that truth out to you if anyone's out there and needs to hear it.
Well, as we wrap this up, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in, send those our way. We'd love to answer those. While you're thinking of those questions and putting those out there, just some wrap-up things. So, when it comes to breakups, and especially if you're in the position of having to break up with somebody, just a few things, a few takeaways. One, as we said, to be a person that demonstrates courage. When you know the relationship's over, then it's important for you to move forward and to break it off, because you're only doing yourself harm and doing them harm by prolonging that. To honor them, to put it through the filter of, am I honoring them in the way that I'm breaking up with them? Am I demonstrating respect for them as a person in the way that I treat them after the breakup? And then a final point being, am I showing them the kind of respect that I would want to be shown and when it comes to a breakup? And then honesty. It's really important to be honest about how you feel and why the breakup and why the relationship has ended the way it has. So we'll leave it there. Does anybody have any questions? We haven't seen any come in. And so we will wrap things up if there are none. Any last thoughts?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, as always, continue the conversation right here. You can type in questions or comments in the comments section. We would love to continue the conversation. You can email me at ike@crosspoint.org and love to continue the conversation that way. We'll be back next week, next Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. right here on Facebook Live, and we will see you there. Thanks.